Welcome back, and a very heartfelt and special welcome to our next guest. His name is Rod Martin, another of our featured regulars here at Securing America, I'm proud to say. The chairman of the board of the Institute for the American Future, which helps make this program possible, as well as a remarkably productive contributor to the public policy debate through the Rod Martin Reports, which I encourage you to follow at rodmartin.org. He is pulling in immense numbers of people on X, and I think making a real impact in a lot of policy circles, as well as in the universe more broadly, with his insights into the challenges of our time and what we need to do about them. Rod, it's great to have you back, my friend. Welcome.
Always good to be here.
And speaking of challenges of our time, one of them that I was just visiting with Gordon about, and I'd like to get your take on it, is perhaps, cognizant that President Trump is very set on increasing foreign direct investment into the United States. He claims to have raised, I think, something like $17 trillion in the space of less than a year. In that vein, the Chinese have reportedly offered him $1 trillion of their own, or perhaps of our own, if Wall Street finances it. Gordon was of the view, as am I, that this is a very bad idea, and I don't know whether you share that view, but I'd love for your thoughts on it.
Well, the devil's in the details, isn't it? If this is really money that belongs to our markets anyway, it's good to get it back. The question is, what does it go into? If they're going to buy more farmland next to U.S. military bases, that's a catastrophe. If they're just 1 trillion among 18 trillion, it's not that big a dent. It's a goodwill gesture to try to facilitate whatever they're trying to get out of us on the trade deal, and maybe we need to pay more attention to that part. But regardless, I would just remind you that during even the Reagan era, we did a lot of business with the Soviet Union. We were kind of indirectly dependent on them for titanium. We sold them a lot of agricultural goods because, in part, hey, it's money for American farmers. In part, it's, hey, we want to stave off famine, which might drive them to the nuclear trigger. And so, there are a lot of things circling here. The question is, will Donald Trump make a good deal? And my guess is, on balance, you can usually count on Donald Trump to make a good deal.
Let me just test this proposition with you, though. You suggested this as a goodwill gesture. I find it hard to believe that a nation that makes no secret, a regime at least, that makes no secret of its determination to destroy this country, evinces any goodwill, and that this is actually simply more of the same to see what they can do. The deal that is on the table, and again, maybe Donald Trump will not take it, I hope he won't, is that in exchange for this arrangement, whereby he might be able to actually dictate where the money goes, he's going to remove trade and other restrictions, including security ones, on this mortal enemy of our country. You're a member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, and I know you're a pretty serious guy when it comes to that Chinese threat. But doesn't all that sound off to you?
Well, as you know, my thesis is that because of their rolling demographic collapse and their economic fragility, which has not been perceived in the West by more than a handful of people, like your other guest, Gordon Chang, until very recently, they are at their peak danger right now. They have to grab whatever they're gonna grab while they can still grab it. So there's no question that China is a threat. China is a mortal threat. In a perfect world, China would make us just completely poof out of existence. On the other hand, China is an export-driven economy, and without the U.S. consumer market, it collapses. I mean, it's just horrifying. And in a direct confrontation with the United States, our ability to close the Straits of Malacca, Sunda, Lombok, and just make the first island chain a fortress could starve them out in 6 months' time. So if they want it, they really have to want it. And my guess is what we're seeing here is maneuvering. Obviously, the Chinese are going to get any advantage they can pull off. There's no question. When I say goodwill gesture, I'm certainly not suggesting actual goodwill.
Goodwill.
Not in the cards. But
it's an important clarification.
Yeah, but it's essential to them to actually have a reasonable business relationship with us because they don't have anywhere to sell their stuff. And if they can't sell their stuff, they go into an even worse deflationary and unemployment spiral than they're already seeing. And the truth of the matter is, they're deploying robotics in factories. They've got all these dark factories, by which is meant nobody has to have lights. Nobody has to have air conditioning, so they just, unless it's something that requires climate control, and they shut all that off, and it dramatically reduces expenses. And that's a separate problem we're going to have to address. But robots don't buy cars and houses, and most of China's wealth is in real estate, which is at this point a rapidly depreciating asset. So they really need the United States. They may hate us, they might want to destroy us, but they absolutely need to sell to us, and that gives Donald Trump an edge.
Yeah. Rod, I'm reminded of the famous line out of Mao to the effect that, they could engage in a nuclear war against the United States, and maybe they lose 100 million people. Well, but they can survive. They've got plenty of people. Now, you're right, the demographics are adverse, but the other piece of this, which I'd like to talk to you a little bit more on the other side of a short break coming up, is Xi Jinping is in political trouble, is Gordon's assessment, and I think that's right.
Mine too.
And does his, sort of safety valve on dealing with that political churning that's taking place involve using military action to justify consolidation of power, rallying around the flag, dominance once again of the Chinese Communist Party, all of that against the backdrop of the economic difficulties that you're talking about. It could get a lot worse, I guess, is the bottom line. Let's talk about that just after this. Stay tuned, folks. Rod Martin is with us, the author of the Rod Martin Report. He also pulls in some wonderful guest authors. It's a great resource. You can follow it, and I urge you to do so at rodmartin.org. Rod, we were talking about China, and nobody knows exactly how this is going to play out. But the question that I have is, should we be bailing out the Chinese Communist Party, which I think would be one of the effects of this deal, at a moment when it seems as though one of the options, or perhaps the only option that she may have shortly to avoid being toppled, which Gordon thinks could well happen at a fourth party plenum coming up, I think, shortly, giving rise to, in other words, the war option to assure his continued hold on power. Again, not the kind of thing we want to accommodate, let alone enable, is it?
Well, I published an article yesterday at rodmartin.org about China's kamikaze strategy to use their two inferior aircraft carriers as bait to draw American forces away from Taiwan to buy time to be able to pull off an invasion. And I encourage everybody to read that. I think it's really an important piece. The kamikaze strategy, I believe is the name of it, at rodmartin.org. So yes, there's absolutely always danger with these people. I think the mitigating factor in this case is twofold. First, where she seems to be losing power is over the military. So I don't know what those guys might want to do. They may want to start a war. We saw that with the Argentine junta against the Falklands, but we also know how that came out. So there is that to consider, and they are considering it, I'm sure. The other piece of it is Donald Trump knows, and I believe he's correct, that if he can just, to borrow from Lennon, give them enough rope to hang themselves with it, buying time where they are kind of lulled into a status quo where risk is kind of high, reward for not taking the risk is also pretty high. We can get out to a point where this regime is no longer able to project that kind of power, or in the alternative, just ceases to be. And I think that's the game he's playing. I think he learned it from Ronald Reagan. And who knows if it'll work again, but it could.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, having worked for Reagan, as you know, Rod, Reagan had taken a very activist approach in his first term in particular to actually taking down the Soviet Communist Party, I should say. And I think that's what's in order here myself. But Rod, I wanted to switch gears, if we could, before we lose you, to a piece that you've published at rodmartin.org about Israel. And there's a lot of news involving Israel at the moment, of course, specifically this idea that another deal, another transaction, if you will, is in the offing that will bring peace to the Middle East. Talk a little bit about that, and in the context of particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, who's getting a lot of criticism from people who we generally see eye to eye with.
Well, we have a lot of friends who seem to have just lost the plot with regard to Israel. Israel is the only country where Arabs have the kinds of freedoms that exist in Israel in the entire Middle East. There's not an Arab country that provides the civil liberties or the opportunity to advance in politics or the opportunity to advance in their career that Israel gives them. And so the piece up today, it doesn't directly address that. It is actually about the capitalist revolution in Israel over the last 20 years. And it's front and center, right in the middle of the top of the page at rodmartin.org. Everybody should go read it. Mike Huckabee just retweeted it here about an hour ago. And it's the story of how they went from their socialist beginnings, because Zionism was originally a very socialist concept, and then in the 70s you start having enough of the disaster that comes from that some change begins to happen. Likud takes power, Netanyahu rises over time, and it's really Benjamin Netanyahu more than any other person or group of persons who made the transformation, made Israel out of a socialist welfare case into a high-tech, high-finance hub that is actually leading the world. And increasingly, the United States is in a position to be an investor and a partner and a customer instead of a benefactor, which is just great for the whole world. And we saw that with Iron Beam. We were talking about Iron Beam last week. This is going to transform warfare, and it's because of Israeli genius and the capitalist revolution that has taken place there.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, as they say, I'm very concerned, I have to say, that what appears to be a bailing out of Hamas, rather than the decisive victory that Israel was, I think, poised at long last to achieve, like the bailing out of the Iranian mullahs, at a moment when they too were at the cusp of perhaps a decisive defeat and maybe even removal from power. These are, countervailing impetuses, but I couldn't agree with you more. I personally, not an unalloyed admirer, I guess an alloyed admirer of Benjamin Netanyahu, both for his achievements in the course of this war, but also for the transformation that he's effected in his country. I think he will be remembered as one of its greatest leaders always. And the question is, are we now watching circumstances tee up in which he will be toppled from power, a longtime project of Obama and Biden. It would be a terrible tragedy, I think, if that were to happen on Donald Trump's watch. A quick
No,
30
absolutely.
seconds.
Netanyahu is an essential figure, and sometimes those do get toppled, as Churchill discovered shortly after VE Day. But nevertheless, it's hard to imagine a solid, sound, prosperous Israeli future that doesn't, at least in the short term, involve Benjamin Netanyahu. As far as Hamas, I really believe they're going to go one way or the other. The question is Gaza going to become a Riviera, or is Gaza going to continue to be a hellscape? And that's a matter of, will they continue to envy?
We have to leave it at that. Thank you, Rod Martin. Come back to us soon. I hope the rest of you do the same next time. Until then, go forth and multiply.